this up a little bit. So maybe I should explain how I got into economics and what this is all about. I came to the serious study of economics through the sustainability movement, and I had been introduced to sustainability through a Buddhist friend of mine who is a professor down in Lexington, Kentucky, and he was designing cities that could be sustainable and whole ecosystems and energy systems. And in the 90s, I got involved in the sustainability movement, kind of in an organizational way. I was part of an organization called Sustainable Hudson Valley, which is centered right there in Rosendale area of Ulster County. Same place where we had our meetup, where I met Meg. And after a couple of years of involvement with that, I realized that, wait a minute, folks, it's the economy. It's about our economic system. And I started around the year 2000, a little bit before that, I started just kind of studying economics on my own. I have a background in music. I have a music degree and still play jazz. But for a really long time, until I published my book, which was about 2015, I was just sticking around my house and reading a lot of economics and doing a lot of contemplation of economics and thinking about economics. And gradually, all the study that I had done, it kind of came together in a couple of different ways, and that eventually came out as my book, which is called Civil Endowment. And the book is about creating capital equity funds that are for the benefit of all of humanity. It's a kind of a big picture concept. And the other activism that I got involved with around that time was the creation of a local currency, which is now operating in mostly in the Ulster County, but some in Dutchess County. But it's really for this whole region. If people wanted to join this, the local currency, which is called the Hudson Valley Current, you could actually join it just by going online. And we have a few members in this area, but it's kind of towards the edge of our region. We're sort of financial by our region. We're sort of a different region a little bit, but you could join it if you wanted to. It's a local currency based on mutual credit. So you could ask me about that if you're interested. But today's talk, when Meg asked me to speak, I decided I didn't want to talk about either of those two very specific projects, but I wanted to talk about something that was more fundamental and what was underlying the whole thing. And this really ties together my whole personal, intellectual, spiritual life, because I've been a student of Mahayana Buddhism for almost 40 years. It'll be 40 years this fall that I started meditating with the Tibetan Buddhist group. And so basically, this talk is about what I call the economics of compassion. And what I've done is I've tried to connect some of the principles of Mahayana Buddhism with economics in general. And it's amazing actually how it actually can connect. And when I start to describe it, you'll see that in many ways economics of compassion is happening all the time. We actually do practice it. But obviously it could be practiced more. We could do a better job of it, and so that's really the intention of talking about it. When you study economics, I don't know if people have studied much economics, but one of the names for economics is the dismal science, right? It's dismal in some sense because a lot of what happened in the 19th century was very Darwinistic stuff and very dark, and it sort of had a very, in some sense, negative view of human beings. That human beings are very selfish, they don't care about others, they just want to maximize their financial returns. And that's kind of how the dominant school of economics actually has that model of human behavior, that we're just basically almost like robots, that we just want to get more of money or something, or utility, or whatever you want to call it. We're rational maximizers, right? And that actually ends up to be a very dismal view of humanity. So The question of whether compassion could be a basis for economics is actually, we should think about whether that's possible. And a lot of people would just kind of dismiss that as just a crank kind of concept. But if you really think about it, first of all, I just want to say that you should think about it. We should think about it. And don't take my word for it if you don't agree. But I've done a lot of thinking about it, and I think that it's both necessary and possible. So those are both good things. If it's necessary but not possible, well, then we're completely messed up. If it's possible but not necessary, well, who cares? But if it's both, and I think it is both necessary and possible that we create an economics of compassion. So I'm not a great speaker here, so I'm going to take a look at my notes once in a while, but hopefully I won't be too distracting. I just want to make sure that I'm not leaving out any of my pearls of incredible wisdom here. Well, here's the thing, that progressives, people that really care about what's going on in the world, actually might even those people might question whether compassion is really the best policy. I mean, maybe we should just make it a big fight, and we should fight those bad people and have no mercy on those evildoers, there's a certain amount of validity to that, in some sense, but the question becomes, well, is that really going to work? And my viewpoint is that's probably not going to work. So we have to do the best we can to take the high road, okay? But anyway, so basically an economics of compassion has the advantage, not that it's going to give us a lot of easy answers to the questions, the kinds of stuff that's really anybody that thinks carefully is thinking about these days. It's not going to give us easy answers to that, but it will give us a way forward. I think it's something of a path. Okay, so that's kind of the background of an economic of compassion. And the other thing is that it can actually be practiced in an uncompassionate environment. It doesn't really, practicing some sort of compassionate behavior or policy or whatever doesn't depend on someone else having instituted that or someone else behaving that way. We actually have to start with ourselves. So that's we could say, well, it's a very dog-eat-dog world, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine, but that doesn't prevent us from going forward in this way. Okay, so that's the basic environment. And the other thing about this basic concept is that it can be practiced very much in a personal way. It can apply to our personal behavior every day of the week, every minute. It can apply to how we deal with businesses, our own businesses. And it can even apply to policy, to our governmental policy and our large institutions, not large nonprofits, so forth. So basically, the way I set up the structure of this idea of the economics of compassion, in Mahayana Buddhism, there are 6 principles that are practiced, and if you develop the proper kind of compassion for all beings, you basically start to practice these 6 principles, and they actually become a path towards enlightenment. Okay, so what I did when I've studied this as part of my personal study, I'm not a teacher of Buddhism, but basically this has been the background of my philosophy that I've been with all my adult life. And so these 6 principles, amazingly enough, can be completely applied to economics, like right across the board, very, very easily. And the first one of these is generosity. Okay, so the idea with generosity is that it's the most simple and understandable and effective way to practice compassion, actually giving something to somebody, right? And there's actually several different kinds of generosity. There's obviously material generosity, but there's also what's called the generosity of protection. If you protect someone from some kind of harm, you're obviously doing something really great for them, and you're doing something it's a great kindness. So I think when we look at, for example, environmentalism, we could think of that as a kind of generosity that we're practicing For example, we're actually thinking about the well-being of future generations, or even the people that are living now. That we're actually protecting people. So that's actually a form of generosity. And the other interesting form of generosity is to actually, you might say, fearlessly proclaim the truth. And in this context, I guess I would say that trying to proclaim the idea that economics can be based on compassion is that kind of generosity. So I drove down here to do that for you guys, to say that. So anyway, generosity is a very, very interesting subject. There's actually a whole school of economics called grants economics. Kenneth Boulding, I don't know if you've heard of them, but he actually wrote a whole theory of grants economics. And of course, the nonprofit world is really dependent on generosity and our religious institutions. And so there's a huge area of the economy that's actually based on giving. And that's a whole piece of it. But as I said, generosity goes a lot further than just material generosity, although it's a very, very important part of it, obviously. The second of these 6 virtues that are talked about is ethics. And again, when you talk about economic life, ethics has always been part of the whole deal. I mean, if you go back to all the ethical codes of all the great religions, they talk about things like don't steal, They talk about stuff like that. Well, that's basic economic ethics. And so one of the good things about viewing ethics from a compassionate point of view, though, is that typically we think about performing ethical actions or not performing them from kind of a legalistic point of view. For example, obviously stealing, we think, well, if I steal something, I'll probably get caught and I'll get in trouble and that won't be good. Or if you have a belief in, say, karma, you might say, well, if I steal something, I will have bad karma in my next life, things like that. That's actually a belief in many, not just Buddhism, but Eastern religions, that if you're poor in this life, maybe you stole too much in your past life, things like that. So, but those are all very personalized viewpoints of ethics. But if you take a point of view of ethics from a compassionate point of view, it's actually much more natural and more healthy. I think it's, if you want to, if you don't steal from somebody because you don't want to take it away from them, you want to be good to them, it's a much more healthy and it's less egocentric. Even caring about karma is basically somewhat self-centered, right? I mean, I don't want something bad to happen to me. So if you believe in future lives, right? So anyway, that's another piece of the puzzle is ethics, and there's an ethics that pertains to our very personal lives, like what you do, how you handle your business, how you do this and that. But there's also this big ethics of what about the whole of humanity? What are we doing around the whole of humanity, like right now? And what are we doing about all the people that haven't been born yet? So there's a huge, and as you guys probably know, there's a whole field of environmental ethics and environmental justice. So anyway, I guess the main thing around ethics that I would get into here today would be that we could see it as coming out of compassion. In other words, we could start with compassion, and then we could see that ethics is good ethics, obviously positive ethics, is something that comes out of the compassion, and that's a far better way to motivate it than to think, I have to obey these laws, I have to obey these rules, or I have to mess around with making more rules or something. It's a more straightforward and direct way. Okay, so the next one, the next of the 6 virtues is something. Thanks so much. The next of the 6 virtues is called patience. I suppose I should get all upset because my papers just blew away, but luckily I have friends. Patience is a little bit tricky to understand because it doesn't just mean patience. Like patience typically means to people that they're just kind of willing to wait around for something to happen, You know, like if your train didn't come and you're sitting there and, thanks so much. The virtue that we're talking about here is more around the idea of not getting angry, not getting upset. So in other words, if your train doesn't come, you're practicing patience by not just getting all upset and cursing and sending a letter to the MTA or whatever. In other words, you're not letting yourself get upset by negative stuff, okay? And so the way I translated that into this economic system was the idea of non-aggression. And the whole idea of the whole possibility of an economics that's based on non-aggression is so radical and revolutionary that we almost can't really even conceive of it, because we think a lot of what's been indoctrinated to us is either this sort of Darwinistic competition between, you know, different economic actors, you know, competition in the economic sense of the word, or it's, you know, from a leftist point of view, there's this whole class struggle thing, and there's the evil ruling class, and then there's the good working class, and they have to struggle to somehow take over and become the ruling class, I guess. I don't know. So if there was actually a non-aggression approach to economics, we would have an amazing sense of freedom. And in fact, that already exists. There's what's called cooperation. What is it that makes cooperation possible is actually non-aggression. And I hope that as I go through these things, you will be seeing that a lot of this exists in the world. I'm not like saying I'm inventing this and now I'm telling you and now it's gonna all start like that. It's not like that. It's more like, wait a minute, let's look at the beautiful things that are happening in the world already. And one of them is the cooperative movement, or just the general approach of cooperation that's part of human life. Even big corporations, even though they are authoritarian structures, they're non-democratic, they're destroying the world, the way they actually get their work done, people, is that they cooperate with each other. Corporations are amazing social structures, even if they are fucking up the world, really. And so are the kinds of things like nonprofits or universities, or they are cooperative structures in one way or the other. It's interesting that the cooperative movement as a formal movement started right around the same time that socialism was launched in England. They started the cooperative movement. So basically, non-aggression could be, you could talk for a long time about why non-aggression could actually transform our economic system. But the only way I just need to kind of lay it out there and say, okay, non-aggression is actually a principle that could actually transform the economy. Okay, I'm just going to leave it at that. The fourth virtue is maybe even more obvious in economics, and that is diligence. I think everybody knows that if you're going to get anything done, you have to be somewhat diligent. You have to work. But diligence in this principle, certainly in the Mahayana system, the diligence of people that are practicing this path of enlightenment, it's diligence to benefit others. It's diligence in virtuous actions. And I don't know, have any of you people seen the movie Heat with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino? It's a great, great movie. It's great, one of the greatest crime movies. But anyway, De Niro plays this guy in this movie who is really smart. And he is a master criminal, and he is so disciplined. He studies, he knows all about metallurgy, and he's cracking safes, and he's got these meticulous plans for this robberies and stuff. And he's diligent. He's incredibly diligent. And the interesting thing is that Al Pacino, who's the cop, plays a guy whose life is kind of a mess, and his wife is, things are going badly, and of course in the end, the cop wins. But the point is that diligence isn't, just working hard. Diligence is actually trying to do something that's positive for the world. And I guess this analogy, this story I brought up about Robert De Niro and all that. In my book, I just said, I hope that the people that want to work for the betterment of the world are as diligent as the crooks. Because believe me, the crooks are really diligent. Okay, they're working very hard. The people that want to just exploit every resource on the planet, they're working hard to do that. Okay, so I just want to mention that we could work pretty hard too. And I also wanted to suggest or thank Meg and all the people. I don't know the names of all the people who put this together, but this festival, as small as it is, whatever, is an example of diligence. So we've got an example of that right here. That I just want to thank Meg for that. She's off working, doing something, but yeah. That was a round of applause for you, Meg. I was telling an example of diligence. The fifth one, and I'm getting close to the end here. The fifth one, in the Mahayana system, the fifth of these virtues is called just meditation or concentration. And we had a wonderful experience with the sound gong over there. And I was sitting over there, and it was beautiful. Thank you for that. And you said to make an intention, and the intention I made was that, well, there's not very many people here, but if even one person is listening, that's going to be good. I'm going to try and do a good job. So I'm trying to fulfill that intention. But really, the idea of focusing has to do with putting our mind onto something that, and again, we're working within this whole realm of compassion. So we're trying to put our mind towards something that's positive. Okay. And unfortunately, economics as a science or as a discipline kind of has a problem with focus. And it's way beyond what we could talk about here today. But I guess the point is that if we could focus ourselves properly, in other words, in the proper direction, that's one thing. In other words, to focus and I want to give one example of this, and I hope it's not controversial or offend anybody or whatever. People have different viewpoints. Here's an example of that I want to give. A lot of people have talked about this whole concept in healthcare of single payer, right? That there's people that I've got Facebook friends that say, like if you're not for single payer, then you're bad, whatever. My point is that this focus on single payer is not going to fix our healthcare system. What makes you think that I'm not saying I'm against it. I actually probably would favor single payer. You can record me or whatever saying it. Single payer might be the best way because it certainly would create some efficiencies and some justices, and it's certainly better than anything else certainly better than depriving everybody of their health care, whatever. But the point is, what's going to fix our healthcare system? Is it going to be single payer? No, that's going to be you've got to actually focus on about 6 or 8 other things too, to get our healthcare system under control. And some of it's not the government, people, So I guess what I'm saying is that when I hear people talking it's all about the fight for single payer, okay, maybe so. If you want to, there's plenty of people fighting for single payer, but there's so many other things that could be focused on. So I think we all have to decide what to focus on. And some of it might have to do with our personal health behavior. Some of it might have to do with working for other systems of medicine. I happen to believe that Tibetan medicine and Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese traditional medicine are really powerful, and that they're also a lot cheaper in their remedies. And that's an example of something to work for. If I was going to work on the healthcare industry. Another thing is that I would like to reform insurance companies. If you're just going to take government money and put it into insurance companies that are just trying to maximize their profits, how good is that? That's not really working out. So I think what the reason I got into this is that the focusing of the mind should bring about a process of clarity and insight into things. And that's just an example. I'm not saying I'm an expert on all this, but I'm just giving it an example of paying attention to what we focus on, okay? It's really important. So the last one is, and I really thank you for your attention to this. I know it's kind of an abstract subject to talk about on a beautiful afternoon in July, but the last one is kind of the summation of the whole thing. It's just called wisdom. And actually wisdom in the Mahayana system has to kind of pervade all the different qualities, all the different virtues. For example, if you are generous but you have no wisdom in your generosity, it could be a big problem if somebody's a major drug addict and they come to you and they want to borrow $100. Well, would it be generous to give them that $100? Probably not, actually. Okay. So wisdom is something that has to pervade all these qualities. And sometimes, for example, ethics, you have to be wise about how you practice ethics. It's not just a matter of rules and regulations, right? But in economics, I've actually come to two principles of economics that could express wisdom, okay? And the first one is one that, in some sense, cuts through our ignorance or our confusion about the way things are. And then the second one is something that expresses the way things really are, okay? So the first one is called post-materialism. In other words, we have a basic sort of mentality of materialism that isn't just about the material world, but it's actually about the solidification of everything that we perceive by the mind. So materialism is not just a culturally conditioned thing at all. It's actually something that's kind of inherent to us. We want more, like I don't think a baby needs to be taught to want things. Okay, we just want things. Some of it's natural. We need to eat whatever we need to do. But so there's this principle that I call psychological materialism, which is kind of inherent to our confusion as sentient beings, that we solidify the things that we perceive. And that because we solidify them, we go through all kinds of patterns of attachment to them. And that's basically a simple explanation of psychological materialism. And obviously that can be translated into our economic behavior constantly. And if you basically glorify the acquisition of things and power and status, that you're basically building up a system that's based on materialism. And we are in a phase of history that could be called a materialistic phase. Okay, so I am proposing that it is wisdom to be a post-materialist. And it doesn't just mean that I'm gonna give up all my possessions and live on nothing or whatever. But it has to do with our mental attitude towards everything and towards economic life. But it also is very radical in the sense that it questions certain things, or it creates a philosophical background for questioning things that most intelligent people question. Like, for example, profit maximization is an example of a materialistic idea that corporations tend to try and take for granted, or they try and rationalize it. The whole idea of shareholder value is another thing. Empirically, shareholder value has been proven to be crap. Okay, but major corporate CEOs have said, this is crap. It's not really a good value. But it's so pervasive in our society that basically it's even felt to be a legal obligation for corporations to maximize their profit. So the bottom line is that we need to be radicals and cut through materialism. Okay, so that whole post-materialism, I have a whole chapter in my book about it. But the other one is a little bit more positive, because basically materialism is basically an illusion that we have created with our minds. Okay. The other principle is, well, wait a minute. Okay, if that's not true, if materialism isn't really the way things are, how are they? Okay, so I posited this notion that I call co-centricity. Okay, that everything is interrelated and everything is interdependent. And there was a wonderful talk about water by Meg earlier about, in some sense, water connects everything. If you can think about it, everything is sort of at the center of everything. Every single thing, every individual thing is in some sort of connection or relationship with everything. And the phenomena that we experience are arising interdependently. That's classic Buddhist philosophy, and it fits. It actually connects with science, and it connects with wisdom. So how would we develop an economic system that acknowledged that? Okay, so it's kind of like, it's not enough just to fight materialism or to get past materialism. Well, what do we do once we see the thing, everything's interrelated, right? That society, for example, we all have what's called a universal responsibility. We, as individuals, we have some kind of responsibility to others, to actually the whole world. What is that, how are we gonna work with that? the interesting thing is that it takes us back to compassion. In some sense, that this idea of co-centricity as a reality principle, not just as something nice, it'd be nice to be compassionate, right? It is nice to be compassionate, but as a reality principle, compassion actually becomes, in some sense, the essence of this co-centric principle. So it really comes full circle here. I've developed a lot of ideas that are based on the co-centricity of economic systems, and you could develop amazing further systems. I don't even think that what I've developed is even a complete picture of it. But the one thing I would mention is that in the global realm, capital is analogous. It's not exactly the same as water, but it's capital is like water, okay, in the global realm, because you have a global financial system with a lot of mobility, right? Just like water is a liquid. In fact, they talk about liquidity, right? Exactly. Right? In economics. So you have global capital that's kind of floating around and flowing and going from different places to different places. In some sense, that capital is affecting each and every one of us, the motivations of the people that are investing it. So bottom line is that when I developed this notion of co-centricity, I got closer and closer to this idea that there could be capital that was endowed to the common good of humanity. That would be a good thing. It doesn't mean that we have to get rid of private property at all. It's as different, that idea is as different from socialism, communism, and capitalism as we now see it, as the two are from each other, okay? So, because it's the idea that there could be a significant portion of capital that was devoted to the common good of humanity. And the implications of that are actually all coming out of this idea of co-centricity. That's the way things actually are. So that's why investments that are good for all of humanity would be a good thing to do. Okay, so that's where I got to with my book. But today I basically just want to talk about the underlying principles of it, and I think I'm almost done, which I'm sure is a welcome fact for all of you. But really, these are all things that we can do in our daily lives, and I think I don't even feel like I need to tell you how each of these things can be done by each of us. But I do want to encourage you to do that, because that's to take that potential of practicing an economic compassion as a personal possibility. So that's where I want to end. One more thing. Two more things. I ordered a bunch of copies of my book. They didn't come, but they were shipped as of yesterday. This is my book. But I did bring, I published books on Buddhism, and this is the first paperback that I published back in 2004. I have a bunch of copies. I think I have enough for every one of it. If you want a copy of it, you can have it. It's right back there on that table where that young man is sitting, and you can just have a copy of it. It's a gift from me.
Do you want to quickly describe it?
The book, Living in Compassion, actually has a whole chapter on these 6 principles. They're called paramitas in the Buddhist tradition. And it also has a whole chapter on how compassion could affect our personal lives, like our family lives and relationships and stuff like that. So anyway, that's this. Yeah, if you want to get one, they're back there. There should be enough for. There's at least I brought 15 copies, so I think you're going to be covered if you want one. Okay, thank you. Beautiful.